one of the cheesiest weapons in the game. If you really want to have easy mode, and this weapon is the easy mode of the game. Hated by a lot of people as well because of an arcane build, and we all know that bleeding is highly hated by a lot of the elite kind of scenario and player base of Elden Ring. That being said, it's a fun weapon that I love to use, and if you find that you're struggling with the game, this is a weapon that it is going to alleviate things for you quite a bit. And it also has a huge range of playstyles. So for example, you can, by all means, whenever you're stressed enough that you just want to kill something fast, you can spam the Ash of War. The Ash of War of this thing is one of the filthiest and most broken in the entirety of the game. It has 3 ticks, and if you complete them, you're usually going to be dealing 10k 10 to 15k depending on the bleeding and the bleeding procs that you are going to have in the enemy. So yeah, there are some instances where you can be fighting bosses and you can deal 10 to 15k damage depending on the resistance to fire and also the resistance that they have to bleeding. Not only that, but it can also be used as a poking kind of defensive playstyle from behind a shield. It deals tremendous amounts of damage once you max out the weapon itself. It has like a huge range for attack range, and when you buff the weapon, because the weapon actually, the Ash of War actually buffs the weapon as well, it can deal 1k attack range, and for a spear that you can be using from behind a shield, that's just nuts. It's just crazy how good this weapon is. So let's talk about the stats, and this is actually where it gets tricky. I'm actually going to give you two build templates for the stats, because there are some really interesting concessions to make here because of weapon requirements and spells that we want to use for our builds. The most important thing is to reach the hard cap in Arcane. A lot of people think that since the cap scaling for status ailments and bleeding is at 55 Arcane, then we can switch to strength because it has higher weapon scaling. And it does, to some extent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you more damage, because it doesn't. The weapon still favors the arcane scaling from the fire portion damage of the weapon, and that's the one that we actually want to increase, because that's where the Ash of War scales damage from, and that's where most of our buffs are going to potentialize damage that come from fire. So there's 3 stats that we want to have for requirements, and that's 24 strength, 14 dexterity, and then 15 faith. The first template stretches that quite a lot, leaving you with just the soft cap for vigor, which for some people might be too low, but it is a concession needed to get that endurance a little higher, to use armor that allows you to have 51 poise to bypass the requirements, not to get staggered all the time, and also 30 mind to spam the Ash of War as needed. The second template, it's a little bit more rounded, however it has a requirement. It is using the Godfrey Major rune, the one that gives you 5 points into each single stat, but you are required, of course, to have rune arcs, and there are not so many rune arcs in Elden Ring to be spamming them. If you like to play quite a lot of multiplayer, then that's something that could alleviate that as well. But once you pop the rune, that should have 60 vigor, 35 mind, 30 endurance, 80 arcane. That should allow you to meet the weapon requirement, the spell requirements that you are going to need, and have even heavier armor as well. Because that set equipment is really tricky. I have a pre-setup for you that works with the endurance that we have on the first base template. That's also a setup having in mind that you would have Earthly Favor +2. We'll talk about that in the Talisman sections, but otherwise it wouldn't work. So Haslow chest piece, which looks just phenomenal, and it kind of fits the style, you know? Scale Greaves and Gauntlets allow you to reach that poise requirements that we need. And finally, Vare Mask. I don't actually have that one because I lost it. I just couldn't find it at the location when I went back the spirit. It didn't invade me anymore, so there's that. But this is just the equivalent. It has the same weight and it has 5 poise, which is the same that Vare Mask has. The Vare Mask is going to give you a boost for 10% attack power anytime that there's bleeding around you. This also accumulative with the Lords of Blood Exaltation that we are going to have as well in the Talisman section. And all of this is going to allow you to bypass the 51 poise threshold that you need not to get staggered. If you don't want to use this set specifically, just make sure that you have in mind that poise, because while the weapon Ash of War does have some high hyper armor, it really is not that great by itself unless you boost it with poise for yourself. For the Talismans, Shadow of Alexander is going to give us 15% more damage in our skill. The Lord of Lord's Exaltation is going to give us 20% more attack power every time that there's bleeding in the surrounding, and this also stacks with the Fire one as well, so that's a plus 30% actually. The Fire Scorpion Charm that gives you plus 12% fire damage, and then we have the Earth 3 Favor plus 2 that allows us to use a little bit heavy armor for us to be able to bypass that 51 poise threshold that we need, because the weapon Ash of War, we are going to be using that one quite a lot. We are going to use two spells. The first one, Flame Grant Me Strength. This is going to give you plus 20% physical damage and then also plus 20% fire damage, which is just more damage overall. And then we have Golden Vow. Golden Vow is going to give us plus 15% damage and also damage resist. We don't have the Faith requirement for this. That is why we're going to meet exactly the Faith requirements just when we use our crystal tiers. The Flame Shouting Cragthea, that is going to give us plus 20% more extra fire damage. That is also going to potentialize quite a lot the weapon skill for our weapon, because that is based on fire as well. And then we are going to use the Faith Not Crystal tier. This should be used to buff yourself immediately with Golden Bow as soon as you begin important fights, because this is what it is going to allow you to use Golden Bow. However, if you do not want to use this and you want to replace it for something different, you can by all means use the Golden Bow of a Dagger. So there's that as well. So once we count every single buff, your overall damage should be looking something like Shadow of Alexander, 15% more damage, Fire Scorpion Charm, 12% more fire damage, Lord of Lord Exaltation, plus 20% more damage whenever there's bleeding around you, Fire Shroud Crack Tier, plus 20% more fire damage, Vare Mask, plus 10% more damage whenever there's bleeding around you, Flame Grant Me Strength, that is going to be divided between 20% physical damage and then 20% fire damage, and then Golden Bow, plus 15% more damage, for a total damage of at around roughly 120 or 130, considering that you have to have in mind the physical damage. So yeah, that's actually quite very powerful. Like I said, it's a very well-rounded weapon because it has the overpower Ash of War, which in my opinion it's one of the, if not the best Ash of War in the entirety of the game, the one that it is going to deal the most DPS out of everything. It's just pure raw power. And one thing to have in mind is that it doesn't necessarily require for the bleeding to be there to deal damage. There's some builds that actually do require for bleeding to be proccing to deal filthy amounts of damage. This doesn't. This just has a huge amount of basic damage, and then whenever there's the bleed, it just becomes that much more broken. And the weapon itself, without using the Ash of War, it's a very powerful weapon that it doesn't require the Ash of War to shine, so you can be using it to explore as well. Anyways, if you like the content, so like and very super appreciated, and also you today you're gorgeous and beautiful person, you're indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person, like the video, subscribe to the channel, enjoy the Discord, where we're going to be playing lots and lots of Elden Ring Shadow of the Earth 3. Have a nice day and goodbye.